welcome back to Lorehammer. I'm your host, Mark, and we're doing another Manifesto here. Manifesto number 8. Tabletop game or fictional setting? We've been kind of following 40K along this thought process of what exactly is this beast that we're dealing with. There's so many different aspects in it as it expands and grows, and over 35 years, it just kind of becomes something different, obviously, than when it started. So just trying to unpack tabletop game, fictional setting, where are we at with this one? But before we dive into that, let's do some quick housekeeping. Come join the Discord. A lot of fun to always chat with people on there. Best way to usually get a hold of me is on Discord, although I'll probably respond if you email me. I usually just file my listener lores away in that guy, though. Come join the Patreon. For $2.50, you get ad-free versions. You can listen to this on Spotify ad-free, so you don't even have to listen on Patreon. You just have to join the Patreon. It'll give you the link to the ad-free on Spotify. So, come join, support the show. And, let's just get into it. So, tabletop game or fictional setting? Is 40K a game with lore or lore with a game attached? Because the question sounds simple, but it cuts right to the core of what Warhammer 40K actually is. On the one hand, it's a tabletop war game. Dice, data sheets, points values. You build an army, you paint it, you measure distances down to the inch. At its foundation, this is a product made by Games Workshop, a company that sells plastic miniatures. But here's the twist. People don't just buy the plastic because it's efficient in the meta. They buy it because it represents something. A doomed crusade, a fallen angel, a high fleet devouring a sector, a brotherhood, a tragedy, a philosophy. People choose armies because they love the story. So which one is driving which? Do the minis exist because the lore makes them meaningful? Or does the lore exist because the minis need to sell? It's easy to say both, but that dodges the tension. Because sometimes those priorities don't align. Sometimes the needs of balanced tabletop game clash with the scale of a galaxy-spanning myth. Sometimes narrative decisions feel suspiciously aligned with release schedules. And sometimes incredible lore moments exist mainly just to justify a new model kit. So here's what we're unpacking today. Does the lore serve the tabletop, or does the tabletop serve the lore? And when those two things pull in opposite directions, when the story and scales and myth and mechanics collide, what actually defines 40K and where we go? Because depending on your answer, it's not just describing a product. You're defining what this universe is. All right, let's steel man it's a tabletop game first argument. At the end of the day, Games Workshop is a publishing house, or is not a publishing house. It's not a film studio. It's not a lore wikia. It's a miniatures company. The core product is plastic. The rules exist to sell it. The selling exists to make it desirable, or the setting exists. Sorry. Look at how releases actually works. Codex books follow model lines. Big faction refresh. Suddenly the faction gets narrative spotlight. A new unit kit drops. It always debuts with a paragraph of lore explaining why this elite strike force has always existed, but is only now being widely deployed. A Primarch returns to a setting. Coincidentally, there's a massive centerpiece model available for pre-order. Major lore beats often align cleanly with product launches. Galaxy-shifting events roll out alongside edition changes. Campaign books coincide with box sets. The story moves when the range expands. And even balance shapes prominence. If a faction is strong on tabletop, it sees plays, it sees visibility, it sees discussion. If it's weak or unsupported with aging kits, it fades. Not just competitively, but culturally. Whole armies drift into the background when they lack active model support. Retcons, simply they smooth contradictions, but sometimes they clearly solve gameplay or branding issues. The lore flexes to accommodate the product ecosystem. Now, that's not inherently sinister. There are real strengths to this model. It creates a cohesive product loop. Story drives excitement. Excitement drives purchases. Purchases fund new development. Release cycles feel structured. When a faction gets attention, it gets it across the board. Rules, models, narrative. It also keeps the setting alive. Instead of stagnating as a frozen backdrop, 40K evolves. New character entries, old ones return. Threats escalate. The galaxy shifts. The hobby feels active because the business needs to be active. And there's something powerful about that tangible connection. You don't just read about a crusade, you can build it, paint it, put it on the table. The lore isn't abstract, it's embodied in the models you assemble. But there is a cost. When the narrative momentum aligns too cleanly with product waves, it can feel reactive. Like story decisions are downstream from marketing calendars. Factions can feel like they surge or recede not because of organic storytelling, but because of release schedules. The stakes can start to feel artificial. If the galaxy-shaking events happen every edition cycle, it doesn't feel earned or timed. Or does it feel earned or timed? When new units are introduced with retroactive justification, some fans feel the seams. The illusion of an ancient, fully realized universe weakens when additions feel bolted on. So here's the uncomfortable question. Is it wrong for a business to structure lore around product? Or is it simply an honest reality of the setting that has always been, at its core, a tabletop game? Now let's flip it. What if 40K isn't a game with lore attached? What if it's a fictional universe that happens to have a tabletop system? Because here's the reality, a huge portion of the fan base has never rolled a single dice. They don't own armies, they don't care about point values. They experience Warhammer 40K through novels, audiobooks, video games, lore videos, and art. And that ecosystem thrives independently. The publishing arm exploded with the Horus Heresy. Dozens upon dozens of novels. A massive character-driven saga that pulled in readers who might never touch tabletop. That's not fluff writing. That's full-scale epic science fiction. Lore channels rack up millions of views. Audiobooks sell. Video games expand the universe to entirely different audiences. The setting has outgrown the table in many, many ways. And here's the deeper point. Emotional attachment drives purchases more than stat efficiency ever will. People don't choose an army because it has a 3% higher win rate. They choose it because it resonates, because they love the tragedy of a fallen legion, the fanaticism of a crusading order, or the cold logic of an alien empire. They see themselves in the philosophy, the aesthetic, the myth. That's a lore-first mindset. The setting builds identity. Fans argue about belief systems, moral frameworks, the Emperor's intentions, not just data sheets. They defend factions like sports teams. They tattoo symbols on their skin. That's not just game-first behavior. That's universe-first behavior. And there are real strengths to this. Deep emotional investments means longevity. Editions change, rules are rewritten, units get nerfed, but the core myth endures. A fan might sit out an edition competitively, but still read the novels that drop. It also allows expansion beyond tabletop. Animation, AAA video games, audiobooks, merchandise, the IP becomes transmedia. The galaxy exists in multiple formats, not just a 6x4 board. But this approach has its own risks. When the lore escalates constantly, when Primarchs return, threats multiply, stakes climb, gameplay can struggle to keep up. Cinematic scale doesn't translate cleanly into balanced mechanics. A god-tier character in fiction can just auto-win on tabletop. There's also a danger of narrative power creep. If the story keeps raising the ceiling, the game must somehow represent that escalation without breaking itself. So here's the real stress test. If the rules were bad, but the lore was incredible, would 40K survive? It's been like that for 10 fucking years. What are we talking about? Would people keep buying the books, watching the content, playing the video games? If the answer is yes, then maybe the setting is the true engine, and the tabletop is just one of those expressions. And now here's where it gets messy, because this debate isn't theoretical. This is where the lore and tabletop collide. Narrative logic does not always align with gameplay balance. In the fiction, a Primarch is a demigod, a being who reshapes battlefields, who can duel greater demons, who turns the tides of wars by existing. But on the tabletop, he's got a stat line, a points cost, a wound cap. And inevitably someone asks, if he's that powerful in the lore, why doesn't he just auto-win every battle? Because he can't. If he did, the game would break. That's the tension. Named characters survive apocalyptic events in the novels only to get tabled off the board by a lucky dice roll. Galaxy-shaking invasions rage across its sectors in lore. but your 2,000 point match represents a microscopic sliver of that war. The apocalypse is happening, but it barely affects the broad state. The classic narrative dissonance, the fiction between story and mechanics. In the fiction, the galaxy is unimaginably vast. In the gameplay, that scale is compressed to a few terrain pieces, a couple dozen models. A war that spans thousands of systems becomes a skirmish in a ruined parking lot. That scale compression. And sometimes it's elegant. The tabletop becomes a symbolic representation of a larger conflict, but sometimes the gap is obvious. When lore escalates to cosmic levels, returning demigods, reality-tearing catastrophe, the tabletop has to translate that into balanced rules. And balance demands limits. Narrative campaigns try to bridge that gap. They inject story into the mechanics. They allow asymmetry. They let the cinematic moments breathe. But competitive metas push the other direction. Optimization, efficiencies, points per wound calculations. In that space, narrative grandeur doesn't matter, only probability does. So the setting is constantly being pulled in two directions. Mythic escalation and mechanical fairness. Which leads to an uncomfortable question. Should lore ever be limited to preserve gameplay? Should the writers hold back on a narrative power creep because the tabletop can't represent it cleanly? Should demigods feel less divine so tournaments can stay balanced? Or is that backwards? Should the game bend to the myth, even if it strains under the weight? Because when the lore and the mechanics clash, something has to give, and whatever side you prioritize reveals what you think 40K truly is. So maybe this isn't an identity crisis. Maybe it's a reason 40K works at all. Because Warhammer 40K might not be a game or a fictional universe. It might be a hybrid ecosystem that only function because of both. Think about the hobby side: modeling, painting, kit bashing, writing backstories for your characters or warband. That's not just gameplay. That's creative participation. You're not consuming the universe passively. You're adding to it. The tabletop then becomes shared myth-making. Two players meet, and for 3 hours, they create a story together. Dice decide outcomes, but context gives it weight. The last objective isn't just worth 5 points. It's the final stand of a dying regiment. It's revenge. It's heresy. It's redemption. And the lore, that's the emotional glue holding it together. Without the setting, the minis are just well-sculpted plastic. And without the minis, the setting becomes an abstract. Something you would read about and never physically engage with. The models make your universe tangible. You can hold a piece of the myth in your hand. You can paint its heraldry. You can place it on the battlefield. But the lore makes that plastic meaningful. It tells you why this warrior matters, why this faction fights, and why this symbol carries weight. Take either side away and the system weakens. If it's only a game, it competes purely on mechanics, and there are cleaner, tighter systems out there. And if it's only a fictional universe, it competes in the awkward, overcrowded sci-fi landscape without the tactile hook that makes 40K unique. But together, it becomes something rare. A universe you can read, play, build, argue about, and physically assemble. Not just an identity crisis, a feedback loop. And maybe that tension between game and myth isn't a flaw. Maybe it's the engine. All right, let's land. So Warhammer 40K began as a tabletop game. That's just historically true. Its rules was first, miniatures first, the system designed to sell armies and let people fight battles on dining room tables. But it didn't stay there. Over decades, it evolved into something much larger, a fully realized fictional universe, novels, epics, tragedies, characters people genuinely care about. Entire philosophy debates about the Imperium, chaos, faith, and survival. It becomes mythos. And today, it's a hybrid ecosystem, not just a game, not just a setting, but a feedback loop between mechanics and mythology. But here's the line we have to draw. Lore shouldn't feel disposable, like it only exists to justify the newest kit. If the universe starts feeling like a marketing tool instead of a living myth, the magic fades. At the same time, gameplay shouldn't be held hostage by narrative power scaling. If every new storytelling escalation forces the rule to bend until they break, the tabletop collapses under its own weight. Both sides need boundaries, because the balance is the point. The minis make the universe tangible. The lore makes those minis meaningful. And that's the secret. 40K doesn't sell plastic because it's a game. It sells plastic because that plastic represents myth. The dice decide the battle, but the lore decides why it matters. So, tabletop and fictional setting, you know. I think the biggest thing that jumps to my mind when kind of that was a blunder, and we know now what happened to it, and it was a clash of like a tabletop game and having to develop minis and that, while also a story. And that's Primaris Marines. So, you know, I don't work from GW. I've talked to people there. I've got some behind the scenes things. I've heard rumors, you know. But from what I've understood, Primaris Marines were developed by the marketing team. No, sorry. Let me jump this back. Sorry. So GW made new Space Marines. They're modelers. They made new Space Marines, upscaled them. And then the marketing team said they need to have a reason for that. So then you get this fictional setting versus this tabletop thing where it's like, okay, well, now they're coming out with all these crazy things to justify these tabletop minis that never needed justification in the first place. You upscaled Space Marines. We fucking would have praised you for days. You did it with Chaos Space Marines, and for some reason, you dwarfed them still. You upscaled them a quarter of the way up to fucking Primaris Marines. So it's like, what are we doing here? So now you have a bunch of different scales of Space Marines on the tabletop to like try to appease the lore that was shittily written to try to appease these new updated tabletop minis. I talked about that vicious feedback loop, and that was kind of it, where it just is like, all of this was just to justify a bigger model kit. Oh my God, you fucking almost damn near broke the setting. You changed it for sure. It's a different setting now. There's hope. But, you know, we've been going over the changes and whether you like them, whether they're right or not, they happen. They're there. Yeah, like I played tabletop before pretty much the novels were coming out. Like definitely before the I know there was novels coming out in like the 90s and stuff. But like before there was like a really big novels push. And I liked it, man. Like I think that's why I always kind of am kind of pulled towards more like codexes and stuff. Like not that narrative. You know, I'm not even like a big tabletop gamer. Like I love it, I'll play it, but like I wouldn't play it if I wasn't playing with my homeboys or something like that. You know, if I didn't want to show off my minis. I mentioned briefly in here, like there's much better games out there. They're much cleaner rules. Like it's fucking impossible for GW. They have the impossible task of balancing a game with hundreds of minis, a bunch of different factions, terrain that changes. It's not like you're playing on a static board. Like the amount of terrain you have on is going to make that Tau fire line seem deadly, or like you're going to get in close because there's buildings in the way. There's another good like example of like the distinction between tabletop game and fictional setting. Like we get this like propaganda of like 10 Space Marines can take a planet, and then on tabletop they get wiped out by some Termagants, by 30 Termagants, or you know, you get 10 Space Marines who kill 1 million Termagants, and on tabletop you don't get that. And like, yeah, how would you balance that? That's another big balancing headache because Space Marines are just already over the top. So then you jump into this whole like, okay, well, if we do go with just 10 Space Marines, that's what the fluff says. Now we're only selling 10 Space Marines, which are a prime model line, you know. And then we go back to, well, the whole point is selling miniatures, so they can't just sell you fucking 10 and be done with it. Although the lore dictates that is what it should be. There was a White Dwarf. I don't remember which one. It was way back in the day, you know, probably around 2004 era, whatever. But they had movie Marines in it, and they were basically like fictional Marines, where it's like one guy was worth 300 points and it's wiping out whole squads of dudes. And it was fun to play with, but like you wouldn't want to play with that. Like that was let's have a fun little evening here and then put this away for a year type thing. Let me play one really cool game with my heroes and kill everything you have. But yeah, it's not a way to really play 40K. So yeah, I think, there is that delicate balance between these two. You need them both. That's what makes 40K so great, is there are so many ways to engage with it, but specifically like the hobbying resonates with people. It's a different thing than playing a video game. Like, yeah, sure, you get kind of some pride and joy when you get your achievements all fucking rattled off on Space Marine 2, but it's a different thing when you've painted 2,000 points of an army and you've spent whatever amount of time and whatever amount of mental energy prepping and preparing everything. Okay, I need my transfer sheets. I need all these paints, and every paint stroke has to mean something. And like, that's a different level of connection. And that's what makes it so like, it just sticks with you, man. It just sticks with you. Like, I have minis that I painted from so long ago where it doesn't just tell the story of that mini. It tells a story of where I was at. Like, I looked at some of my minis and I'm just like, oh yeah, I painted those minis in Panama. Or, oh, that was my first mini I painted. I was just a young little gaffer there, just whatever. They have their own stories after the stories. Or I painted that mini with all my homeboys. We did that in a one-day painting competition, whatever it may be. But yeah, I don't know. I like them both. You can't have one without the other. You definitely, the tabletop game would die instantly if it didn't have the lore backing it. Like, if we were just dealing with fucking, I don't even know any other fucking like Combat 47. Like, who knows what their lore is? I don't even know, man. Whatever. But the game would die without it. Well, GW, if you're listening, it's a tough balance to strike. You're trying to manage a business, make money, expand a story, reach new audience. You're trying to do all these things, and you're never going to appease everyone. I think just remember that, like, it is it is a story, yes, but the holding power is in the minis. Like, plastic is eternal, man. Like, I can invite somebody to my house, somebody random, and they won't look at my bookshelf. Yeah, like, they might look at my bookshelf. Oh, you got a fucking lot of books there. Oh, what are these books? Okay, whatever. Not the same as if somebody comes to my house and they fucking open a door and there's a 2,000 point fully painted like army there. Like, what the fuck did I just walk into, dude? What kind of room is this? Completely different holding power. So, we can't get rid of it. We can't really sacrifice the tabletop either anyway. I don't think they really do. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it's fucking annoying. The release schedules are like, oh, so you want to push new models and now we have this new big lore, whatever. Fuck it. You can get past stuff like that. All right, I don't know. End of rant. I think I'm just talking now at this point for the sake of talking, when I could be doing other things with my life. So I'm going to go do something else. We got 2 more manifestos to come. One more kind of, what is the next one? Let's just quickly check since it only takes 1 second. More than what I need. Okay, we're almost there. Oh, yes. Okay, so this one, codex versus novel versus expanded media. And even homebrew. I'm going to add homebrew into there. There's so many ways to get your lore. Like, but where do we put our stock into? Like, I'm sorry, Space Marine 2 is cool, but I don't know if it should have been canon. There, I said it. Fucking great game. Shouldn't necessarily be canon. That's a good question. We need to answer questions like that. So on the next episode, we're going to kind of break down, where do you get canon? All canon equal? Should you tier your canon on your sources and all that kind of stuff? So yeah, see you on the next episode.